Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome again to another episode on Talk Architecture Podcast with your host, Naziaty Mohd Yaacob. This is the third part and the final concluding part on a series that goes and comment about an article entitled Designing for Disability Justice on the need to take a variety of human bodies into account by Matthew Allen, published on February 10th, 2021 at the website Graduate School of Design, gsd.harvard.edu. And this third part is the part where we actually wind up the story on disability in architecture, the bigger topic under that. But we did discuss specifics and how the interview that Alan had with the four people that looking into the critical model of disability rather than the usual medical or social models. So one of them, a couple of them are involved with MASS. So this next paragraph is continuing from the previous part and part two in particular, and we'll go to the conclusion later. MASS has come to specialize in projects at the intersection of multiple complicating factors, disability included. They have been commissioned to design a symbolic Black Deaf space and a memorial at Gallaudet University, which is the only university that is designed to be barrier-free for deaf and hard of hearing students. It will honor Louise B. Miller, the mother of a Black deaf child who sued the Washington, D.C. Board of Education in 1952. The son could not attend the Kendall School for the Deaf at that time because Washington was segregated. Miller sued, and she won her case at the Supreme Court. Although the suit did not successfully segregate the school itself, it represented an early blow to the Plessy versus Ferguson principle of, quote, separate but equal, unquote, by ruling that the school district could not deny its Black deaf students the right to free public education. As a result, the Kendall Division II school was created, a segregated school for deaf children at Gallaudet University. Then the next paragraph, despite its part in the larger fight against segregation, this story has been largely overlooked on campus, which propelled student and community activists to demand a memorial that could convey the significance of this historical moment and, quote, honor the Black deaf community's fight for educational justice in America, end quote. The parameters of the project have made for a productive challenge. Mansfield says, quote, if you look at the architecture of Gallaudet, the Olmsted landscape in the high Victorian neo-Gothic architecture is very symbolic of this idea of abundance in terms of public investment and grandiosity, which really stands in contrast to the hastily built utilitarian architecture of the Division II school, which was eventually demolished. The memorial will be on a challenging site, but it represents a unique opportunity to remap the cultural landscape of the university, unquote. The hope is that the memorial will lead to racial reckoning and healing, an active collaborative process that wouldn't have never happened if black deaf people did not demand it. The long-term goal, next paragraph, the long-term goal of cultivating a critical mass of designers, a design community that maintains a shared interest in disability, can begin as simply as listening to the same podcast. Excuse me. Hamre has been doing disability justice organizing for 10 years alongside work as a scholar. Quote, "It began with my participation in the Occupy movement. Since then, I've been very embedded in disability culture and community. My podcast called Contra addresses design from disability culture framework, which means that it highlights the knowledge and practices of disabled designers, artists, researchers, curators, and activists working toward a more accessible world. But it is not, quote, disability 101, unquote. You can think of it as a window onto a community that does not actually try to do translation work to bring others into that community so much as it notes its existence without euphemism or apology," unquote. Emery continues, quote, "This work builds on many activists and scholarly podcasts I admire. Alice Wong's Disability Visibility, Kathy Hanneback's Imagine Otherwise, Adrienne Marie Brown and Autumn Brown's How to Survive the End of the World, and others. Podcasts have a way of building communities through their audience, and so I have been interested in them as sites of intervention. There are new ones being created every day, which expands our community and the conversations we can have." The next paragraph. "As a profession, architecture can do more to include designers with varying abilities in its ranks. Hendren says that she, quote, would certainly like to see more kinds of expertise encouraged, more illuminated pathways for young people to get into architecture, not just young folks who are interested in parts and systems like engineering and then want to do something vaguely aesthetic with that technical expertise. Some of the best designers are, at heart, generalists, by which I mean voraciously curious, wide readers drawing from an interest in people and interactions and patterns of sociality, a commitment to public and civic spaces in a form of shared life." This is an important summary, in a way, of the sentiment or the attitude that is prevailed in this article with regards to the 4 protagonists that had been interviewed by Alan. And the underlying thing is the need for more designers from the disabled persons community or from disabled persons themselves. And disability is vast. I mean, in terms of a diverse number of categories, which people like to use the word categories, or it could be not so, shall we say, stereotypical. It could be seen as full of a lot of ideas and concepts in between them, even in between the different disabilities. And being a designer and also a disabled person, you could really lend the whole idea of sensorial experience and sensory design and design per se to be critical rather than a lip service or a design, shall we say, a, a way of designing that is not inquisitive, not curious, not explorative, and banal in a way. So, therefore, this paragraph thinking that architecture can do more to include designers with varying abilities in its ranks would push it, would push the envelope in terms of getting ideas out there that would help with society and communities better and would encourage the learning and the depth of learning to help societies, encourage societies, thus breaking barriers, breaking a natural barrier that's been put up. Well, not natural in the sense that it's nature, but it is like something that is commonly found, rather ubiquitous, or a barrier that is noticeable in society. So, more kinds of expertise encouraged would eliminate pathways for young people to get into architecture. When I think about it, you can come into architecture from being an expert. If you're a disabled person, you're coming into architecture being an expert, really, in your lived-in experience. From your lived-in experience, you can actually give something to the community, and in this case, the design community. Not just young folk. Yeah, it's quite becoming a common thing that architecture is more like engineering, but you could come in with being interested in aesthetics, like even interior design or the way the lighting works and how the feel and vibe could be. And with your technical expertise in architecture, or your understanding of the technical ability of how to change things, you're not just looking at the conversation that is usually to do with the law, regulation, and technical stuff. You'd be also interested about people and how people react to the architecture that they are experiencing. And this is an important thing. So having the best designers could be generalists, and generalist is not a bad thing. As we know it, that you're interested in what's happening in public spaces, interconnectivity or problems with connecting and having seamless travel from one space to another. Some of these issues need to be addressed and not just put at the back of our mind. So this next paragraph, is coming to the end of the topic, where Hendren is cautiously optimistic about the future. Quote, "I've been heartened to see the emphasis on maintenance and care get more formalized design attention in recent years. It's a matter of attention, drawing up and formalizing some of the labor, artifacts, and interactions that are already happening, and using a rhetorical spotlight to say, 'Look over here, this counts too.' This counts too is actually the title of an essay I wrote with an anthropologist colleague, Catherine Lynch, on a digital archive of low-tech prosthetics called Engineering at Home. That's a design project in that same spirit drawing a frame around design that's not usually recognized as such. Hamre emphasizes that, quote, interventions can take place in all sorts of sites, the political process and in public spaces, but also in institutional spaces where knowledge is created and disseminated, unquote. The global pandemic and the shift to remote learning may be just the right impetus for the GSD to bring undeserved users and communities more systematically into design processes. Everyone is relying on technological augmentation. Everyone is remote from centers of power. Let's not miss these opportunities to continue asking ourselves how the design disciplines can be made more inclusive.
Looking for creative inspiration? Graphite Pro Radio explores the intersection of design, culture, and innovation, one conversation at a time. Join us for deep dives into the creative process and game-changing ideas. Start listening today.
Now, I just want to shift the focus to the dev space that was mentioned earlier in part 2. It's a website called gallaudet.edu/campus design facilities/campus design and planning, which /dev space. Dev space is a space that is in College Hall 303. This is a description of deaf space. Deaf people inhabit a rich sensory world where vision and touch are a primary means of spatial awareness and orientation. Many use sign language, a visual kinetic mode of communication, and have a strong cultural identity built around shared life experiences. So this is a case study for the series. We have this at the end to actually make a conclusion based on this case study. That is the deaf space at College Hall 303 in Gallaudet University. It further says that our environment, largely built by and for hearing people, presents a variety of surprising challenges that deaf people have tackled by altering their surroundings to fit their unique way of life. This is the concept of deaf space. Deaf space is spelled one word, D-E-F, capital D-E-F, capital S, the rest is lowercase space, deaf space. When deaf people get together, they often work together to rearrange the furniture into a conversation circle to allow clear sight lines so everyone can participate in the visual conversation. Gatherings usually start with participants adjusting window shades, lighting, and seating to optimize conditions for visual communication that minimize eye strain. Deaf homeowners often cut new openings in walls, place mirrors and lights in strategic locations to extend their sensory awareness and maintain a visual connection between family members. These practical acts of making a deaf space are long-held cultural traditions that, while never before formally recognized, are the basic elements of an architectural expression unique to deaf experiences. The study of deaf space offers valuable insights into the correlation between senses and how we construct the built environment and cultural identity from which society at large has much to learn. So next is a title called the Deaf Space Project. I'll read a bit on the principles that they have here. The Deaf Space DSP developed the Deaf Space Guidelines. The Deaf Space Project, developed the Deaf Space Guidelines, a catalog of over 150 distinct deaf space architectural design elements that address the 5 major touch points between deaf experiences and the built environment. 1. Sensory reach. 2. Space and proximity. 3. Mobility and proximity. 4. Light and color. 5. Acoustics. Common to all of these are the principles of community, visual language, promotion of personal safety, and well-being. They talk about these concepts. They're not principles, but concepts here. It says here, sensory reach, space and proximity, mobility and proximity. They explain each one of them in this website. And it's interesting. It's about the public space that they want and the concepts that needed to have. These concepts could be easily absorbed into architectural concepts. I mean, like designers, we get a project and we already have in our mind what concepts that we want to employ, but we haven't really learned about what deaf space is. And we could just easily adopt it and it will create something unique. And that is what we want. So for example, sensory reach is a spatial orientation awareness of activities within our surroundings are essential to maintaining a sense of well-being. Deaf people read activities in the surroundings that may not be immediately apparent to many hearing people through an acute sensitivity towards visual and tactile cues. These clues include vibrations, shadow movement, and reading subtle shifts in the expression of others. Designers can facilitate spatial awareness in 360 degrees to improve deaf people's orientation and wayfinding. So this 360 degrees is something that you create and to have the spatial awareness for deaf persons to create that sensory reach, that they could reach, the whole room at the back of them and also in front of them. This is something that we could incorporate in design, obviously. In any typology, if it has too much clutter or it's not well defined and the lighting is not good enough, deaf people may struggle because of not able to have the sensory reach. So that's an example, and you can talk or you can find out more about this later. But what I like to do now for a few minutes is to actually conclude on designing for disability justice by looking back at the introduction that we had earlier in part 1, where designing for the disability justice on the need to take a variety of human bodies into account. It uses the word justice, the fairness of it all when you design for disability, and the critical model of disability goes beyond medical and social model of disabilities. It goes to making the input from disabled persons crucial, and they themselves could assume the role of designers. And how do we incorporate this would make the design, the product, much more sensitive and accommodating for the variety of human bodies into account. This is what it means. So I go back to the first sentence, that disability ought to be an exciting subject for architects about lived experience, problem solving, and designing a better built environment. So with that in mind, maybe we can learn from these 3 episodes in this series and build on this, our understanding on designing for disability justice, and under the umbrella of architecture and disability, we could understand that it's not only about standardization, it's not only about following the standards and complying to the standards. It's something to build upon that and beyond to get the design much more sensorial, much more helping with the different senses, and standardization, although is mandatory, although is in a way help a lot for us to understand, but it should be something that we go beyond standardization. So thank you very much for listening to part 3 and the conclusion of this topic. All the best.